Good evening. Tonight I'm coming to you with some important information regarding our return to school plan and news and information floating around. I know there's a lot of questions related to this topic, and rightfully so. And so hopefully this video will help answer and address those and also direct you in the right place in case you have additional follow-up questions. I want to start by sharing some guiding principles that a few weeks ago I shared with our school board and just some things to think about as we approach this whole concept of school reentry. These are some of my thoughts and beliefs, and I want to start by being really clear that I believe all staff want to be safely back in school. The narrative that floats out there saying that people just don't want to go back to work or that we don't want our kids back in school just is not accurate. Parents are rightfully concerned for their child's well-being and their family's survival. There's a lot of rhetoric focused around, the role schools play in our communities and the importance of getting kids back in school. But I think it's deeper than that. There is a real concern for their children's safety and well-being. Whether we think so or not, fear is real, and the fear that what people think or believe related to COVID and certainly unprecedented times that none of us have ever really been in before. Unfortunately, I believe a lot of this is our new normal. So as we try and frame around what's going on with school reopening, there's a part that I think when I hear the phrase, we just want to go back to normal, isn't really realistic. At the same time, there's a lot of people who appear to be experts related to topics and have the answer, but I don't really believe the answer fully exists. And that's what's made this particularly challenging related to school reopening, is that there isn't one set of expectations and standards that's the absolute right answer. And unfortunately, we all know this to a certain extent, but media and social media has certainly impeded our community and maybe even some of our ability to think critically and to think and to know what's going on. And there's so many stories related to COVID and coronavirus that it becomes overwhelming. And finally, whether we're frustrated or not by them, we have great partners from the Grant County Health District, OSPI, and the Department of Health, as well as our district, that are all working very hard to do whatever it takes. And so pointing our fingers or saying, okay, this organization, I wish they would do this or that, quite frankly, is misplaced. I want to start today from this quote that's out of the school reopening process from Superintendent Chris Reichdahl. And he simply says this: this guidance is grounded in my belief that the most equitable opportunity for educational success relies on the comprehensive supports for students provided in our schools with our professionals and the systems of support we have built. We will do this together, keeping student and staff safety and well-being as our highest priority in the reopening. To be very clear, it is my expectation the schools will reopen this fall for in-person instruction. I say this because this is where we started with in development of a plan and to drive some of the decision making between what we have happening in our district. We've set up a special email address as a way of getting through all of the questions focused on this topic, and we ask that you please use it. If you have questions, concerns, ideas, things you need more clarification on, just send it at covid@nlsd161.org, and our team can respond and filter through those. As you can imagine, there are many questions out there, and we want to make sure to be able to navigate them in as expedient way as possible. Before we dive into a lot of details looking at the three options, I wanted to start with some things just to clarify right from the beginning, because some of these might be some misconceptions that are floating around there. So first of all, our school district return to school plan includes three different options, and the intent is to offer all three of those for students, families, and our staff to access. So the board's recent action wasn't to pick between those three options, but instead to confirm that our intent is to offer all three of those to be selected by our students and families. Probably not surprising, but none of these options are just going back to normal, school as we once knew it, nor are any of these options doing just what we did last spring. And I think those are probably two of the biggest hurdles to get through, because they're kind of the impost of the polar opposites that we've tended to navigate. And the fact is neither of those are really realistic. And instead, these return to school options are different than them. At the same time, our intent is for each teacher to be placed into one of the plans, not all three. So I know sometimes there's some confusion of how am I going to do this and this? And the reality is our intent would be for our staff and teachers to be in just one of those plans, but not all three. This video might be a little bit frustrating for some of our staff outside of the classroom, but I need to stress at this point we've started in the classroom and are working our way out. So other positions such as our classified staff, maybe some of our administrators, our non-classroom staff, we haven't gotten there yet, but I hope you still watch this as a way of understanding exactly what is going on with each of the three options. And while our board has approved the back to school plan at this point, our initial plan has now been submitted to the Grant County Health District. And so we haven't got that official stamp back, but I'm going to talk about the approval process here in a few minutes that makes it maybe not as linear as we might want it to be. We started the work for school recovery several weeks ago now, and we have 10 very active teams working, kind of approaching this from all different angles. We have a team looking at professional development and learning, led by both Anna Griffith and Christy Hoffines. We have a team looking at grading and feedback in these virtual settings, led by Trisha Hochstetter and myself. We have a team looking at all the safety, training, and orientation needs to make sure that safe learning conditions and working conditions are in place for our staff and students, and that's being led by Liz Prey and Dave Balcom. We know that we've got to know where our kids are and know what's next for them, and so we have a team looking at academic screening and diagnostics, led by Nikki Mackey and Christy Hoffines. A big piece of concern throughout all of this closure and in this process is meeting the social, emotional health, and well-being needs of our students. And we have a team looking at that, led by Sherry Ward and Dr. Meyer. Human Resources has a team being led by Barb Shimmick and Carol Meyer. And that team is specifically focused on all the employee related issues and safety plans returning. We have a team led by Claire and McLaughlin and myself that has been looking at gathering input and voice from the community, as well as constant forms of communication. Don Sherfy and Dave and team members are looking at facility cleaning and disinfecting needs. Lisa Ballard and Joe Conley have a team focused on what health screening, hygiene, masking, and social distancing will look like. And finally, a team specifically focused on how transportation and food service work in all of these different plans, being led by Wes Kelly and Joe Conley. So as you can tell, we've decided to approach this kind of from all angles to ensure that we're working through it. That doesn't mean we have all the answers yet, but what it really means is that we're trying very hard to cover it from all bases. Something that is out there that I need to start to open the door with, and this is probably more focused on our staff at this moment, but it does also apply to students. But we know that there are people, both staff and students, that need some special consideration due to being at an increased risk related to COVID-19. And so this is the most recent written explanation from the Department of Health related to being at risk. And unfortunately, this might be one of the places where either perceptions or different things read online tell you other things, but this will be the list we'll be working from and helping determine those special considerations to ensure the safest working conditions for everybody. And so that list that's on the side are the people that are considered at the increased risk for severe illness. And those are our older adults. We know that the risk increases with age, with our older adults being at the highest risk. And then people of any age with any of the following conditions are at the greatest risk. Those with cancer, chronic kidney disease, CPOD, those immunocompromised state from a solid organ transplant, those with obesity, serious heart conditions such as heart failure, coronary artery disease, or cardiomyopathies, sickle cell disease, and type 2 diabetes. The list on the right-hand side are other groups that, quite frankly, it's not fully known what the risk is. And so My point in sharing this is as we start to navigate this, and if you feel like you are on this list in some way, that now is the time to really start working with your healthcare provider to ensure the proper documentation is coming so that we can make sure that you are being taken care of and that we're developing a work plan for you that meets that need and decreases the risk when you're maybe in that increased risk state. A lot more information will be coming about the actual documentation and process from our human resources team, but I wanted to start with this as a way so people really know and understand by the Department of Health's recommendation of what is considered being at risk. As you know, this has been an ever-changing landscape as we've navigated through this. And so this particular slide that I've used a few times at this point changes literally day by day. But what we know right now is that some things that are changing with the health district, our district school nurses and myself will have a meeting with the Grant County Health District on Monday, August 3rd. Those have been very helpful in that partnership to really navigate through things. And so I'm anticipating getting some additional information at that time. There's been an anticipation of some more directives or information coming from the Washington State Department of Health. And we have not seen that yet, but that doesn't mean the anticipation still isn't there. And then I want to remind us all, while there's been other unofficial statements made and maybe questioning about what's the right decision for schools and in all of those pieces, OSPI has actually only released one set of return to school guidance, and then that was from July. And so no other official guidance documents have been released, but we certainly know there's a lot of conversation related to this big topic. This slide's very important to understand that what all of these options have in common is that there are 5 minimum things that we have a responsibility for ensuring. And they are complex at best. How this was best described to me, that I think is kind of a nice visual, is that not one of these 5, fully protect somebody from getting the coronavirus or COVID-19. Instead, they should be thought of like a stack of Swiss cheese. So while all of them have holes in them, the hope is that doing all 5 of them at the same time basically are that layer of protection to help keep us all safe. One of those there's a lot of conversation around is social distancing. And so there is an expectation that we will be practicing physical distancing of 6 feet as much as possible. Facial coverings, wearing cloth face coverings maybe help the spread of COVID-19 and is required for staff and for students. So all people on campus will be expected to be wearing a facial covering. And the recent updates have included a lack of support for face shields. And there's some reasons for that, but those face shields just don't provide the same layer of protection as once did. Daily screening, we will have a process for checking signs for illness for all staff and students at entry onto campus each day. So stay tuned for more of that. And it's a series of questions and both monitoring to ensure that people aren't either coming to work or coming to school sick. That's the bottom line. This one has never changed, but we need to keep that out there, is that one of the best things we can do is to wash hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. And we should really encourage and set up expectations and routines that include students and adults should be washing their hands when they arrive at school, before meals or snacks, after going outside, after going to the bathroom, after blowing your nose or sneezing, and before leaving to go home. And obviously, we need to make sure we're helping our youngest children to make sure they're doing it right. And then cohorting. We have an expectation to really limit contact with students outside of their cohort, meaning we really want to minimize the number of transitions and changes of groups throughout the day, because every time we change one of those groups, that is one more possibility for exposure. So with these in mind, we've built them into each one of our options. And obviously, some of them are more applicable to some, but these are out there as sort of the minimum core 5 objectives we have to meet. I list this as a nonlinear step for approval because one of the big questions right now is, well, what, is the plan approved? And unfortunately, as we navigate this month between now and when school starts, is we're going to constantly be kind of in this issue of where we're at in the approval process. So There are a variety of quote approvals that need to be happening to pull this all together, and none of them are linear. So it's not like it goes from one to the next to the next. And so I wanted to just be clear that where we're at is so at this point, you see this in the bottom left hand corner. Our school board did approve the plan on July 30th. We have a responsibility for submitting it to OSPI by August 19th and expect some level of approval or commentary or feedback for that. We know that we have parents and family as a community, and there's a level of their approval by sending their kids with us and by keeping their kids enrolled. The Grant County Health District, they have been participating as an active part of our process, and they will continue to and have been a great partner. But ultimately, they have a voice in approving this plan. We employ just over 1,100 people, and we need to ensure that we are meeting safe, legal, and appropriate working conditions and standards. And so there are L&I expectations and guidelines that we have to ensure we're following for that approval. We know we have a big set of working conditions and collective bargaining impacts that we need to work through, and that process has just started, but we know that we'll be working with all of our groups, such as MLEA, PSE, our principals, and others to ensure that we're finding common solutions on the changing and shifting working conditions. And finally, we know that all of these have a pretty significant overhaul of a schedule within a school setting. And so we know that we've got some pretty big scheduling impacts to work through. This document is attached to this email, and so I hope you get a chance to download it and look at it more specifically. And I'm going to go through it in much more detail than probably is listed on there. But this is our official return to school plan to give some information, some brief information about each of the options. So let's look at them each individually. Let's start with option number 1, blended learning. And the purpose of going through each of these is right now, I think there are some varying perceptions about what exactly this means. Now, remember that none of these options are doing what we did last spring, and none of these options are just, quote, going back to school as normal. And so here's where these are at in the process. So with blended learning, the short version of it is that classrooms of students are divided into two groups, a group A and a group B. And half of the students attend campus for instruction for 2 full days per week, and then have 3 remote instructional days. And then the other half is on the opposite days of those. And so if you are working with students in the blended learning model, you would expect to see half of your students on Monday and Tuesday, and the other half of them on Thursday and Friday. This will likely be occurring in separate parts of the building from option 2 that we'll get to in a second. So it's an early warning that we're going to need to talk about classroom assignments and location of classrooms so that we can ensure that we're meeting some of those cohorting standards that are set out for us. And so please be patient as we navigate through that. We believe this is creatively achievable at all grade levels. And so while it's going to look a little bit different, we believe we can really do some awesome things with this at each of our grade levels. Based on a statistical sampling of our school district students and families, we anticipate just under 40% of our students and staff would be in this learning in this model. So that'll include just about 200 of our teachers, but district-wide, about 725 K2 students, 875 students grades 3 through 5, 825 middle school students, and 925 students grades 9 through 12. This plan would have teachers working in teams, with some delivering on-campus instruction and some remote instruction, but not both. And that's probably one of the biggest clarifications on this one, is that staff assigned working in this model would either be doing the on-campus or the remote instruction, but not both. And the idea is for a family to all be in the same group. So if I have a student, for example, at Longview Elementary, at Frontier Middle School, and Moses Lake High School, while their schedules might look a little different during the day, is that we would be connected together in group A or B if the family requests that. Unfortunately, in all of these models, we're quite simply not going to be able to offer all of the middle school and high school classes that we once did. It just doesn't work with the different models and to try and accomplish it all. And then we know, and we've got some works in place where this is going to look a little bit different at elementary and secondary, and how those collaborative teams of teachers work together. Here's a graphic of what the schedule might look like for a week. So you see Group A would be with on-campus instruction on Monday and Tuesday, and then remote instruction on Thursday and Friday, and Group B vice versa. You'll notice a very significant non-official school day on Wednesday. That's a on-campus day for either group, where the idea is that the students participate in some of their individual remote instruction. This is a great time to work on projects and assignments, but not under the necessarily direction of their remote instruction teacher, because the staff we're proposing would be participating in additional professional learning and development that awesome Team 1 is putting together, as well as planning, spelt incorrectly, and I apologize for that, but also having office hours and a proposal that we'll be presenting to move our PLC Mondays to Wednesday and to allow for the continuation of those professional learning communities. So you see graphically kind of how it comes together. We're early in the process of this, but obviously the structures of elementaries and middle schools and high schools work very differently. So let's first focus on elementary. What the idea would be is that students would be assigned to a classroom teacher for the on-campus instruction. So for example, if I'm a second grade teacher, I would have half of my students on Monday and Tuesday and half of them on Thursday and Friday. In connection with that, we would have a team of people that are assigned to a group of remote teachers to serve their needs at the discretion of the building. So what that would mean is within each building, maybe that team decides to kind of divide up the caseload by grade level, serving just grade levels of students, or maybe by subject or special projects or needs of the students. And we really want the building to help be involved in exactly how that remote team that are working in the blending model really meet the needs of students. At the high school level, we have a slightly different plan, actually middle school and high school, and this is still coming together. But we believe both to meet some of the cohorting, but also to really kind of model the courses that students take, is that we would have on the on-campus instruction day, students would take a set of classes on campus, most likely at this point in a block schedule, giving you a little bit more extended time taught by teachers. It also lowers transitions and allows you to go deeper on the days when students are face-to-face with you. Then a different group of teachers would have a set of classes that students take on those remote instruction days. So what that might look like hypothetically at this point is that maybe students have 4 classes that they take in person on their on-campus days, and maybe 3 different classes that they work on their remote instruction days, also facilitated by a certificated teacher. So you see these slight differences in how those support teams come together. But the good news is it's not an unrealistic expectation of trying to do both. And so we want to be very sensitive to that. And we know that a lot of this is hard work for everybody. And so we want to develop as much of a realistic plan as we possibly can. Let's shift a little bit to option 2 now and look at that on-campus learning. So on-campus learning, we would be in a mode where we're reducing classroom size to facilitate social distancing. And something that's embedded in the OSPI expectations and some of the health regulations is really looks at the classroom kind of from a square footage standpoint, and looks at numbers to say, okay, what are the right number of students that could fit into that classroom to practice as much social distancing as possible. I think we have to all know that the structure of our classroom, students don't stand still. They don't operate in a bubble that nobody comes into. And so that's where that Swiss cheese analogy kind of comes back into play, that things like masking and hand washing help, so that if, that 6 feet of social distancing is compromised at certain times of the day or for certain activities, then there's other safety measures in place. These students that are in this option would be on campus all day, every day. Again, not all classes would be able to be offered at middle school and high school. And we're trying to really, again, maintain some of that cohorting by reducing the transitions and looking at a potential AB block schedule at middle school and high school, where they can take their classes, but they don't necessarily see all classes every day, but instead they see a part of them for an extended period of time. Again, this is likely going to have to occur in a separate part of the building from option number 1. So while we have both groups on campus, the goal would be for them not to overlap and interact with each other. About 31.84% of our students and staff, would be uh, participating in this learning model. And so that would involve about 122 of our teachers serving 675 K2 students, 675 3-5 students, 750 middle school students, and 650 students grades 9 through 12. And then finally, remote learning. And I have to start by this as saying this is not the same as last spring. And this has probably been one of the most confusing parts of that. Not all middle school classes and high school classes would be available for this remote online instruction. This teaching would be facilitated by staff remotely, likely at the district level and in larger groups. And what I mean by that is the likelihood of us having the right student load of any one subject matter or at any one grade level within a particular school is going to be probably not very likely. And so you should expect that you might be serving students from multiple buildings throughout the district for this remote learning. This was actually the least favorable of all of our student and family interests, just about 22%. And so it would include about 35 of our teachers. We anticipate serving about 550 K2 students, 375 grades 3 through 5, 350 students grades 6 through 8, and 565 students grades 9 through 12. In this model, we anticipate modeling very closely after our existing MLSD digital program and the ability to be fully remote and using instructional materials that meet that need. And so at the middle school and high school, we plan on using the APEX curriculum. At the elementary level, K through 5, there's still a lot to be determined about exactly what that looks like, how it's delivered, because APEX really isn't appropriate for the younger grade levels. As we navigate through these, there's a whole lot of things that are still kind of penning out there that I want to make sure you know that they're on our radar and at the same time as we work through them. So the first of those is we have to recognize that lunchtime and cafeteria probably isn't going to be very realistic in a traditional format. And so we may have to look at models where lunch is eaten in the classrooms or in small areas of the building. That will need to be a building by building decision because all of our spaces look a little different. And so the principal and nurse will need to work very closely on what that looks like. We are going through a process currently of evaluating all non-classroom based staff to consider the lowering of class sizes. So when we look at meeting the needs of our students across these systems, we really have to adopt all hands on deck mentality. And so we are looking at all of the certificated staff that are non-building based or non-classroom based positions, And so we are considering those for how exactly we meet the needs. We will be asking for semester-long commitments from our students and families. We can't facilitate students and families bouncing back and forth between these options because, as you can tell, they're really functioning like smaller little schools within a school. We have some challenges. Some of the OSPI guidance is very clear about not facilitating programs that bring students together from multiple buildings or, in our case, even from multiple districts. And so both our NOVA program and CB Tech are currently working on how does that really work, because both of those programs are based on pulling people together from multiple locations. And so that is in place, but I don't want to forget about that. We are asking at this time that all personal furniture items, such as couches, chairs, etc., will need to be removed from the classroom in alignment with policy and hygiene practices. That actually was already an expectation and maybe one that we haven't done a great job of following. But now it even becomes more critical because as we look at cleaning and sanitizing classrooms, things like fabric couches are, quite frankly, germ magnets, and we want to make sure that we're able to clean and disinfect classrooms in an expedient way. So please develop a process now to take those items home, sell them at a garage sale, do whatever you need to do, but we are going to have to go through a process where principals will be working with you to ensure that those things are not in your classrooms anymore. The grade rule changes and special graduation waivers that happened last year expired at the end of the school year. So that creates some really unique challenges for us because as we look at all of these, we have to be positioned to have grading expectations in place. And so as you saw, that one team was working on that. And we know that we can't just throw everybody into these models, that we're going to have some time and opportunity for some orientation to understand how this works. How do I check in? How do I keep social distancing? What are the classroom expectations? And so just prepare that as we navigate through this, we'll really be working on models that have an opportunity for that orientation to start rather than just sending people loose. Again, as we if this may have prompted some additional questions, but please make sure you're using the email address covid@mlsd161.org to give us a chance to respond, get additional information, or whatever it takes to really get there. I want to leave you today with a thought that's kind of been driving me throughout this process. This is a quote that I heard quite a while ago. And it simply says this: "Don't tell me the sky's the limit when there are footprints on the moon." And I know that a lot of things may seem impossible, and it may seem like we should really focus on the what ifs and what if this happens and what if that happens. But I need us to stay focused on dreaming and knowing that school is beyond just a place where kids send their kids for daycare. School is beyond a place where it's just about learning content. And we have a much higher purpose. And so what's kept us going through this is knowing that the impossible might very well be possible. And while there isn't a guidebook or a rule book or instructions of how to do this, is that together we'll continue to work through it. Stay tuned for a lot more information as we go. Thank you for taking some time to watch this today. Good night.